Hey, 42 here. If you're like me, you'll sometimes wonder what it must be like to be rich. And I'm not talking about flying first class and staying in luxury hotels rich. I mean taking a private jet to the hotel you just bought so you can have a gold toilet installed in your penthouse rich. Few of us will ever experience that kind of excessive wealth. But there's something undeniably fascinating about the super rich. It's almost as if they're a different species. They may look like us, well, us with much better clothes and the kind of skin you only get from bathing in Evian, but they're fundamentally different. It's almost like a person's behaviour gets odder as his or her income increases. Kanye. The more money you have, the harder it is for people to say no to you, and there are few bigger bank balances than that of a billionaire. There are numerous examples of those with the deepest of pockets doing the strangest of things, from Elon Musk sending that car into orbit, to the time Mr. Burns tried to block out the sun. Why do billionaires have such a weird compulsion to mess about with space? Anyway, for the most mind-bogglingly wealthy and bonkers billionaire there has ever been, you need to go back long before Tesla and The Simpsons. May I introduce you to the weird world of Howard Robert Hughes Jr., a plane-flying, film-making, adventure-loving, germ-fearing entrepreneur, and easily the most eccentric billionaire who's ever lived. Howard Hughes Jr. was born in 1905 in Houston, Texas, the son of Howard Hughes Sr., a wealthy inventor and businessman who made his fortune by patenting a fancy kind of drill bit. That might not sound like the business idea to spawn one of history's wealthiest men, but this was no ordinary hardware store drill accessory. Howard Hughes Sr.'s two-cone rotary drill bit revolutionized the drilling of oil wells during the Texas oil boom of the early 20th century. In other words, it was practically a license to print money, and little Howard grew up with all the things a boy could want. Not that he was just some coddled rich kid though. From a very young age, he demonstrated an impressive engineering talent all of his own. His dad set up a workshop in a shed behind their house, and at 12, Hughes Jr. made what was described in the local papers as the first motorized bicycle in Houston, by taking parts from a steam engine and adding them to his bike. Perfectly normal, run-of-the-mill 12-year-old boy stuff. Playing games outside with your friends, starting to fancy people at school, turning steam engines into prototype motorbikes. The usual. Despite his undeniable engineering excellence, Howard wasn't a great student, and his parents sent him off to a fancy private school in Boston in the hope that he would later go to Harvard as Hughes Sr. had done. However, Howard's academic record didn't really improve whilst he was away, but he did get really bloody good at golf. He also underwent one of the greatest epiphanies of his life when first on board an aeroplane. He instantly fell in love with the feeling of flying, and a lifelong obsession with aviation began. Howard's upbringing reads like some kind of quaint British fairy tale that's undergone financial doping, but the good times were about to come to a swift end. When he was 16, his mother died during pregnancy, and 2 years later, his father passed away after suffering a heart attack. At 18, Howard was suddenly an orphan. An obscenely rich orphan, but an orphan nonetheless. In 1925, he inherited 75% of his father's $1 million estate, that's over $16 million today, and a large stake in the family business, Hughes Tool Company, with the other shares going to his relatives. Almost immediately, Howard disagreed with them about how the company should be run, but he couldn't do anything about it as he wouldn't legally be an adult until he was 21. So, when he turned 19, he went to court and got a judge to declare him an emancipated minor. That's a minor as in a child, not as in a person who digs. Although, given the tools they were making, I guess technically he was both. The ruling meant that he was now officially an adult, and he promptly bought out all of his relatives until he owned the company outright. Whether this maneuver made him a dynamic captain of industry who was wise beyond his years, or a precocious little shit with no loyalty, is up for discussion. But it certainly set a precedent for how he'd conduct business for the rest of his life. The same year he assumed full control of Hughes Tools, Howard married his first wife, Ella Rice. But he wasn't happy with simply being a filthy rich tool magnate, and the couple relocated to LA. So Howard could pursue his twin passions of filmmaking and flying. The flying got off to a flying start. He was a natural, but the filmmaking fell flat. The first short film he financed was such a disaster that he ordered every print in existence to be destroyed. But gradually, he started to have some success. In 1930, he produced Hell's Angels, which isn't about large hairy men polishing their motorbikes, but is a tale of heroic World War I flying aces. The movie was a mammoth production that was 3 years in the making, largely because its many epic dogfights were all filmed for real. This was a time when health and safety protocols were very much optional, and 3 stunt pilots and a mechanic were killed during filming. With the death toll mounting, the film's final stunt was deemed too dangerous to even attempt, but as Howard was now an experienced pilot, he decided to have a go at it himself. It was a brave, but ultimately rather foolish decision. He crashed during the maneuver, fracturing his skull in the process. Not that the near-death experience put him off flying, quite the opposite. In 1934, he founded the Hughes Aircraft Company, which produced several experimental planes that he tested himself. The first of which was the Hughes H-1 Racer, and in 1935, Howard broke the world land plane speed record whilst flying it. Though in what was fast becoming a bad habit, the record flight ended with a crash landing. This time he walked away with nothing more than a few cuts and scrapes. Howard's aviation obsession would see him set several other records over the following years, and he also oversaw the production of the H-4 Hercules, better known by its nickname, the Spruce Goose. To this day, it remains the largest seaplane ever built. At this point in his life, Howard was an almost superhero-like figure. He was tall and fearless, good-looking, a super-rich businessman, and a genius engineer. If that's ringing any bells, you might not be surprised to learn that Hughes was actually Stan Lee's inspiration for Tony Stark. Like Iron Man, Howard also loved the company of beautiful women. His marriage to Ella only lasted 4 years, and once he was a single man again, being young, handsome, and absolutely filthy rich, he didn't find female company hard to come by. In the 30s and 40s, he dated a string of the most glamorous movie stars of the day, including Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, and Ginger Rogers. The outbreak of World War II saw Hughes Aircraft secure lucrative contracts to build military planes. But despite millions of dollars from the US government, only 3 were ever delivered. Now, I'm no military historian, but I'm pretty sure you need more than that to fight a crowd of Black Friday shoppers, let alone a war covering half the planet. The government felt the same way, and Howard was hauled in front of the Senate Commission, accused of gross mismanagement. But something much worse than a grilling from a group of aging politicians was waiting around the corner. One of the planes Hughes Aircraft had been meant to produce during the war was the XF-11, a reconnaissance craft. In July 1946, a prototype was finally ready. Better late than never, eh? And naturally, it was Howard who took it out for a spin on its first flight. But like the Titanic, the XF-11's maiden mission was to end in disaster. Midway through the flight, the plane sprang a leak and subsequently crashed into the wealthy LA suburb of Beverly Hills, destroying 3 houses as it went down. Howard was pulled from the wreckage moments before the entire thing obliterated in a fireball. But although his life was saved, he was badly injured in the crash, suffering 3rd-degree burns, a collapsed lung, and multiple cracked ribs. His recovery was slow, necessitating months in hospital, during which time he was given a high concentration of opioids for the constant pain. It proved to be a turning point in his life, and from then on, drugs would forever play a role in his day-to-day existence. Despite the huge personal setback, business was booming. Hughes was a modern-day Midas, and his golden touch soon made him the richest man in America. He expanded his empire by purchasing a controlling stake in Trans World Airlines and building a missile plant on a 6,000-acre plot near Tucson, Arizona. His business acumen and lack of morals served him well, and he did things which your other more run-of-the-mill billionaires didn't dare. For example, he set up the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in 1953. This charitable foundation undertook medical research, and as soon as it was up and running, Howard transferred all of the stock from Hughes aircraft into it. As a result, one of the world's biggest defense contractors was exempt from paying any tax almost overnight. Sneaky. In 1957, he married his second wife, the actress Jean Peters. But away from the public eye, his antics were becoming increasingly erratic. And by erratic, I actually mean shit-flinging mental. He once stayed in a darkened film studio for 4 months straight, rarely wearing clothes and eating only chocolate bars and chicken. He spent his time there watching the same films over and over again, whilst rearranging the dozens of tissue boxes he kept nearby at all times. As for whether they were sad tissues or happy tissues, I assume that depended on the film. Hughes had always been eccentric, and to some, this kind of behaviour was evidence he'd finally gone to Gaga land. But the truth was much sadder than that. Hughes had always suffered from crippling OCD and an extreme fear of germs, conditions that eventually consumed his life. These kinds of illnesses are debilitating no matter who you are. But Hughes' incredible wealth and influence meant he could give his compulsive behaviours free rein. He was known to incinerate his entire wardrobe whenever he thought too many germs had made their home in his favourite outfits. And he wouldn't even talk to people if they had so much of a speck of lint on their clothes. He washed his hands to the point that they bled, and in later years he rarely wore clothes at all, because doing so caused him physical pain. After years of living alone in a bungalow at the luxurious Beverly Hills Hotel, Howard moved to Las Vegas in 1966. There, he settled in the penthouse of the Desert Inn, whilst the entire floor below became a base of operations for his vast empire. After a year of living in the hotel, during which time he didn't ever leave it, he simply bought it outright. It would be the first of many purchases in Vegas. During the course of 2 years, Hughes bought more hotels and casinos than any other investor in the city's history. Amongst them was the Silver Slipper Casino, which had, as its sign, a large rotating neon slipper. Howard could see it from his penthouse, and the shining shoe apparently kept him awake at night. After the hotel's owners refused to switch it off, Hughes bought them out for a ludicrous sum just so he could get rid of the sign. He became such a recluse that in 1970 Jean filed for divorce, claiming that for years she'd only ever spoken to her husband over the phone. By this point, he had little to do with the running of his business empire. The day-to-day decisions were being made by a small group of advisors. Then Howard vacated Vegas in the early 70s and lived out his final years in another luxury hotel, which he bought in the Bahamas. Almost nobody saw him in those days, as he was slowly consumed by mental illness. He hardly ever cut his hair, beard, or nails, and when he died in 1974, he was so unrecognizable from the swashbuckling industrialist of years past that the FBI had to use fingerprints to make sure the body was really his. It was a deeply sad end to an, at times, brilliant life, and an important reminder that good health is a treasure we just can't put a price on. Before illness robbed him of his reason, Howard lived life to the fullest, making millions, breaking records, producing movies, and swanning about with the hottest babes in the golden age of Hollywood. To get to do any one of these things would have been incredible. To do all of them in a single lifetime? Now, that really does take something special. Thanks for watching.